I'm LaTournous. We're standing here in White Mills at the bottom of Elizabeth Street, and I was born in a cottage just on top of the hill here in 1926. I lived in White Mills most of my young life. Well, my earliest memories would be more as a child running around in the factory, which was shut down for many years at that time. The factory closed in 1919, and I was born in 26, so there was, it was just an area that was open to the public. It was like a more or less like a park. I mean, you had people just ran through it, and no one seemed to do any harm at all, but it was a thoroughfare because the factory was setting in the middle, and we were all living around in a circle around it. So to get from here to there, you had to pass through the factory yard. But that being able to go into some of the buildings and see the big shafts that were used to run the belts for the cutting machines and things like that. That was my first memories of the glass factory. I'm right now standing on Elizabeth Street. The part that we used to call the Big Hill. It's a very steep grade. And I'm right behind the Dorflinger office. It's a stone building, has 4 slopes on the roof, which looking down this way, it stands in front of the cutting shop. And the cutting shop goes down to Route 6. Now, all the buildings that used to be there, the blowing shops, are gone. They've been gone for years. I know my memory goes back to the 30s, and they weren't here then, but there were 2 big mounds in front of the cutting shop. As a child, I didn't know what they were, but evidently they were the remains of 2 furnaces. And they disappeared sometime. I don't know when that happened. Well, Christian Dorflinger came to White Mills. Originally, his first trip was because his health was deteriorating. So the man he knew in Brooklyn owned a hotel that he stayed at, and he knew that he was not feeling well. He owned this land up through here, not the White Mills proper, but just the other side. And he suggested that Christian Dorflinger come up here for a rest. Well, that was kind of getting him out of the city because he fell in love with the area, and that's why he came here. And he had no intention of starting a factory, but he couldn't sit idle, so this is what happened. He started nibbling at a little bit, and a little bit, a little more, and it grew into quite a factory. But that's basically why he came here. I guess at that time, Dorflinger was everything to the community because Christian Dorflinger owned the community, first of all, and they produced, not only produced glass, but everything hinged on it. The lumbermen, the men who made barrels, the coopers, everything that was happening in town at that time hinged on, it was all part one and the same. Everybody worked for Dorflinger, whether they worked indirectly or directly for Dorflinger. And it was a complete economy in itself. Even as far as the early days of the canal, they brought in everything that was needed for glass making. There was nothing here. And it was just one complete unit, the way I see it. Absolutely. It was a national scale because in 1892, when the factory burned, uh, that was a little bit suspicious too, because all around through here there was a high fence, and all around there was no access to the plant. But when the factory burned, it was stated in the paper that 90% of all the cutting shops in this country were out of business because of the lack of their blanks. So that's saying quite a bit. But they had representatives all through the country. They might not have had their own offices, but they had someone to represent them. And they also shipped out of the country. Well, Dorflinger produced just about everything I can think of, but what would be described as art glass. They produced the most simple things, such as oil lamps, the chimneys for oil lamps, and right on up to the finest cut glass that you could imagine. That was done in the day. In fact, they were well known as you might say, the king of the glass producers.